in this video we're going to do an install on the Panoptix PS21 trolling motor transducer. Got everything I need out of the box here. Got my threaded collar washer, which will go onto the transducer connector here in a minute. Got our hardware mounting knob. We're going to do a barrel mount, a shaft mount. There's also a barrel mount installed or included with this kit, and then our PS21 transducer. So your tools required to do this install is pretty simple: 3/16 Allen key, some wire strippers, a lighter or other heat source for shrink tubing, some crimping tool, side cutters, and then supplies wise just got some shrink tubing. You might need some various different types of connectors depending on your application, and then you'll need a whole bunch of zip ties. So we're going to do the mount on the shaft. As I mentioned, there is a barrel mount included. Two reasons I'm not doing it: one, you don't need to on a trolling motor like this, because it is a cable steer, so we are able to run the cable up the shaft. If you have an electric steer trolling motor, your only option is here, because your whole shaft will slide up through your mount at the top there, so you can't zip tie a cable to it. So in this case we don't have that issue. We're going to go ahead and just mount it onto the shaft here. A couple things to consider when you're doing this is where your transducer is going to be placed. Your trolling motor, when it's at rest on the boat in the mount, I want my transducer on the top, not on the bottom, just so it doesn't interfere with the mount, rub against the mount. So you just have to make sure that you install this guy here facing up. So in order to get these screws in to hold the other side of the mount, we will have to deploy the trolling motor. So I've already got this trolling motor transducer for my down view and side view and chirp sonar installed. So I'm just going to leave a little slack in here to put this in, and we'll go from there. Okay, so what I'm going to do just to start these is just flip my mount upside down. That'll allow me to start these much easier. And these are a 3/16 Allen head socket. You don't want to over tighten. What you want to do is tighten diagonally and maintain the same amount of gap on each side. Okay, so I've got that on there. The way you want to do it is have this piece, so the transducer is going to sit like so, where it's going to be pointing the same way as your trolling motor. That way you can use the directional indicator on your trolling motor as a bit of a means to know which way your transducer is pointing. This next thing we'll do is take our transducer, take the supplied mounting knob, and get that into place. You want it from 90 degrees, about 15 to 30 degrees, pointing on a downward angle. That's going to give you your best imagery. So for now I'm just going to put that into place, measure that angle up later. And because I have my other transducer wire here for my traditional sonar, I'm just going to kind of work these two together so they'll come up the mount together, and just place a couple zip ties to hold these in place. So what I'm going to do, just to give this a little slack and to reduce strain on this connector, is just bend this wire a little bit here and allow me to attach a cable tie just like that. Then I'll go up and attach these ties at about every 4 to 6 inches. Since I have two cables in here, and you'll notice on the Panoptix there's a power and an Ethernet cable, so I've actually got total 3 cables. I like to keep those tied a little bit closer together. So a crucial point on this installation is right here where we are connecting the wires with zip ties from the upper shaft to the lower shaft. We just do this. When this shaft spins, it's going to put a tremendous amount of strain on these cables and possibly damage them. So what I'm going to do is just leave a little bit of slack. Often helps if you start your zip tie first. Okay, so just like that. Tighten that one down. And what I'm also going to do because I've got two separate cables. Just going to throw a couple on here to keep all of this together. I'm actually going to put two on down here, just because this is usually a strain point where you're going to get one to break. Okay, so those are on. Now I'm not going to attach zip ties here because as I can do with this trolling motor is loosen this off, and as I come into shallow water slide this up. So I'm just going to leave these loose, just neatly fish them up above this bracket and then zip tie them up here to the top of the head. Now before going further with this, it's a good idea just to slightly deploy your trolling motor and then spin it hard over to hard over, just to ensure you have enough cable. Now I have a little bit too much tension on this, so I'm just going to let a little more cable out. Your next thing to consider is how you're going to get these cables to your sonar unit. One common way is to run it down the cable of your trolling motor, and then you can attach it to the sonar unit down here. I'm not going to do that because that's just going to promote interference. What I am going to do is just use some zip ties right here. Take my trolling motor cable, again leave some slack, zip tie them on to these points, and then I'm going to put a cable tie here to allow the transducer cables to run up underneath. Now if you don't have these holes here to put zip ties in, you can just drill a few holes into your mount to attach those zip ties. So that'll look just like that. This isn't completely tightened down yet. Because I have two cables here, what I'm going to do is just zip tie them together just to keep it clean, pull it up nice and tight, and then tighten these guys down. One other thing you want to do is just leave a lot of extra slack here, because you can adjust the height of your trolling motor, the depth I should say, so you're going to want to have that extra slack there when it's pulled up, and then when you lower it down you'll just have a little extra slack, loose slack in the cable there. So that's what I've done. I've just gone down, attached these. So next thing I'm going to do is just attach this little guy onto my cable. What that's going to allow me to do is just have a connection point here, just like that. That'll keep everything nice and neat. Okay, so I ran the cables through that there, coming down, zip tying them together. I have two cables here. We have the Panoptix and then my traditional transducer, as I've mentioned. Comes down, coiled up my extra cable, and we're faced with our connector and then our power connection. Now if you're going to be passing through any holes on your boat, to get this connector through, drill those holes, pass this through, and then bring it out to where your unit is going to be, and then you can install the threaded collar that Garmin provides. You can install this washer first and then this threaded collar. They just come off. You can sometimes snap them. This one's snapped, and I'll just take side cutters and cut that remaining piece off here, and then those will snap together. With the Panoptix, what I have to do is this has to go to the back of the unit, this has to go to 12 volts somewhere underneath, so I'm just going to pull these two cables, separate them. Okay, so I've separated those two cables. This one will run up under the dash to 12 volts, this one will run out to the unit. So now I'll show you how to install that threaded collar. So first thing, I'm just going to take this rubber gasket and slide that up over, making sure it's sitting in there properly. As I mentioned, this broke apart, so I'm just going to take some side cutters, cut these remaining pieces. Your threaded side needs to go up, so just like that. And you can see there's a male and a female. That will just allow these two pieces to snap together. Okay, so that's on. So you can see it's definitely good that Garmin does it this way, just due to the size of that connection that would have to go through. So before going further with this, I'm just going to go and cut off all my zip tie ends, and then we'll connect power. On most boats, what you'll find is there's power takeoffs up under the dash. In this case, there's just a positive and negative line. Got a couple of these available. This one runs right to the back cranking battery. This one runs to my trolling motor battery. So what I'm going to do is just verify that this does have 12 volts, and then I'm going to make my power connection there. Some boats will have, you know, a panel on the back dash where existing fish finders or other 12 volt accessories are wired to. So if you can just look for that and then verify with a multimeter that you do have 12 volts, you're good to go. So I definitely have 12 volts there. I got my charger hooked up right now. That's why the battery's reading a little higher than 12. So I've tucked my cables up under there nice and neat. I'm gonna just zip tie them in place. Now all I need to do is just connect the power 12 volts here. I'm gonna have to trim these connections up a little bit because they're a little long for these butt connectors. So I'll just trim those off and then use a crimping tool to crimp those on. So just slid a couple pieces of shrink tubing on top of those wires first. That'll allow me to crimp those on, and then use that shrink tubing to just keep that more of a waterproof connection. Okay, so those are crimped on. Just feed my shrink tubing up over top, and then get a lighter to shrink that down. Okay, so our next step is just to determine how much slack we need in these cables. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is plug them all in, and then just zip tie them together so I know basically how much cable I need in order to neatly tuck everything else up underneath there. So now when you do this, you're going to obviously want to accommodate for the angle as well. So now that I've got those cables, I kind of just reset my angle. And I'll just put a few remaining zip ties on here just to keep these all together. Okay, so now I can just cut off these zip tie ends. I'm going to use this sleeving to push the cables through just to give it a clean look. So that sleeving is on there nicely. I'm going to take this little tie, just put this in to hold these into place, and then just screw that in there. Okay, so that's the installation on the Garmin PS21 Panoptix transducer. That's a shaft mount installation. Nice and neat with the all the cable ties there. So that's basically what you need to do, and that's good to go. One final thing before we complete the installation is we have to take it out on the water to calibrate the compass.